Hello. So today I'm going to talk to you about the INFP cognitive stack. So Jung, when he came up with the different personality types, did some intensive research into understanding how the different types think. So the way Jung characterized INFPs is that he described their cognitive stack as having 4 functions: introverted feeling or FI, extroverted intuition or NE, introverted sensing or SI, and lastly, extroverted thinking or TE. So sometimes in social media, you will see that INFPs are referred to as FI DOMs. That is just casual language to refer to a type that leads with introverted feeling, or what in short is called FI. So INFPs are introverted feeling dominant types. Now, what are these functions all about for those of you who may not have familiarity with it? It's not that introverted feeling refers to someone's emotional nature, and if someone's led by it, that they are led by their feelings or that they make decisions with their feelings. And neither is it that, introverted thinking or extroverted thinking, denotes someone who makes decisions using logic or rationale. These are actually very interesting, deep terms, and to get into each of them in detail would take a lot of time. But I will try to provide a brief overview of these different functions in the INFP cognitive stack in this video, with the hope that it helps you understand the basics of how INFPs process information cognitively and how they respond to things in their environment, how they process information, how they make decisions and take actions, and other things. So coming to the first function that Jung did a lot of research on, the feeling function. There are 2 different types. You can either have introverted feeling or FI in your cognitive stack, or you can have extroverted feeling or FE in your cognitive stack. Now, because cognitive functions are arranged in an order and each individual in Jung's types has 4 cognitive functions, it means that you can have your feeling functions in either the first slot, the second slot, the third slot, or the 4th slot. And you can have it as either introverted feeling or extroverted feeling. Now for INFPs, their feeling function is at the very top. So think of 4 different functions that are stacked in order, with the first one being the most powerful and the last one being somewhat less powerful than the other ones. So INFPs have the feeling function at the very top of their cognitive stack. And what feeling function do they have? They have introverted feeling or FI, not extroverted feeling or FE. Now, to explain a little bit about introverted feeling or FI, or what it is all about, or what it denotes, and how people who have introverted feeling in their stack make decisions. It is basically about someone's values, the way they come up with their own ethics, their morality, and how they feel about something or respond to it. Now, someone's values do not have to necessarily come from emotion. It could actually be derived from logic. So if the FI at the top of the stack is, deriving itself from, let's say, a different function like NI or TI or some other function, its nature would be a little different from how traditional FI might work or how FI might work for, most people. So someone who has introverted feeling in their stack is very sure of how they feel about something, what they think about something, what their own values and morals and ideas are. So they're very attuned to understanding how something makes them feel or how they think about something. So it's derived from a very internal process, unlike extroverted feeling or FE, which kind of derives itself from the surrounding, from social institutions or other kind of institutions that are there in the environment. So for example, if you're living in a culture where everyone feels a certain way about, let's say, homosexual marriages or gay relationships, because the religious institutions, the social institutions, and other kind of institutions in the environment have a certain idea about it. Someone with introverted feeling or FI has a very kind of secure boundary to their perception and their cognition. So it's not that if everyone else believes in something or thinks about something a certain way, that they kind of absorb it. So FI is not very permeable. It's very sure of itself and it's very defined. So individuals who have introverted feeling or FI in their stack often have quite well-formed, strong identities. Even if, for a type like an INFP, whose second function is Extroverted Intuition or NE, which is, a softer kind of creative looking function when you look at it from outside and when you're observing them physically. Even though they can look gentler and, like they're flexible, they're actually individuals who have a very kind of defined personal identity and sense of values and morals. Now, introverted feeling makes you very aware of how you feel about something, what you think. So, for example, in relationships, it gives someone the advantage of, not ending up giving more than they actually want to, because they're very clear about exactly how they think about something or how they feel about something. So they're easily able to express or communicate, their thoughts with their partner. Whereas, individuals with extroverted feeling can have much higher environmental empathy or respond to their environment in a way where, they are serving their partner in a way where they, may end up giving way more than they actually intend to and suddenly get frustrated or something like that. It's not a deficit of any kind. I'm just trying to share how these two functions differ. So introverted feeling gives the individual an excellent ability to kind of recognize their own needs, their own thoughts, their own identity. So they have a very secure identity in that kind of a way. Now, of course, just like every other function, it has its own deficit. What does that mean? That they're not always as aware of, how someone else may be feeling. They're not that permeable. So a problem that can happen with introverted feeling in the stack is that they can express themselves very honestly and sincerely, and that can, unknowingly end up hurting someone else's feelings or, doing something that makes them uncomfortable or something like that, which can take, these individuals by surprise, because INFPs are extremely empathic, kind individuals. So, having such an empathetic side, they are generally not ever expecting to hurt someone or cause them distress or, make them uncomfortable. But because they have very clear opinions, even if they are reserved initially, they might end up saying something a certain way, very honestly or transparently, and that can, kind of perhaps unknowingly hurt a different individual. However, of course, if you ever communicate it to INFPs, they will do whatever it takes to, kind of fix that problem. So INFPs with introverted feeling or FI in their stack have very secure identities and a very clear idea of how they think about something, how they feel about something, and their, general sense of values and ethics that they kind of walk in the world with. Now coming to their second function, or extroverted intuition, the intuition function kind of describes someone's cognitive strengths. How is it that they process information that they're receiving from the environment? So introverted intuition, which INFPs don't have in their stack, is all about convergent thinking. So you see different things in your environment and your mind is naturally attuned, your cognition is attuned to kind of, seeing a pattern and converging to a single point. So these people have excellent kind of inferences or analysis about something they're looking at. So you'll find that, when they take up a certain interest or something like that they go really deep into it. Their analysis of an individual, for example, or anything really, like a situation, something that's happening around them, is very, very precise and detailed. They are slow, but they go really deep into it and it's very accurate. Whereas for INFPs, their second function is a very interesting function called extroverted intuition. It's the obverse of introverted intuition, and extroverted intuition gives someone the ability to have divergent thinking. So what that means is that they will find creative interconnections between ideas that may kind of apparently look like they have no connection at all to each other, to other people who are looking at it. So that's why they have a very creative kind of intellect. Their mind is able to go from one thing to the other, to something that may have some kind of interconnection creatively to those former ideas. So it's a very, very interesting function. So this gives someone the ability to have conversations in a way where it just flows. The conversation skills that INFPs have is that they can keep talking to you for a long time by finding these creative interconnections between various ideas. So it's very interesting. So it can be mistaken as something, as a function that makes someone shallow. I wouldn't say that I would analyze it that way, that introverted intuition makes you go really deep into a certain subject, and extroverted intuition is kind of like jack of all trades, master of none, and they're basically just jumping from interest to interest or idea to idea. But their natural talent, their cognitive talent and intellectual talent, lies in the fact that they're able to see these connections between different ideas and different kinds of knowledge that they receive, and thus they're able to kind of with very creative businesses, other kind of creative things that they write about or that they speak, and it can be very refreshing to other individuals who are exposed to those ideas. So that is a little about extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition, as I would say, well, any of the functions really, can affect someone's gaze actually, from what I have seen, and I've found that some others have discussed as well. So when you're looking at someone who has introverted intuition, you will find that their eyes kind of stare into space a certain way. It has a kind of penetrativeness, even if they're gentle individuals themselves. Whereas if someone has extroverted intuition in their cognitive stack, it kind of gives that individual, even if they're very logically incisive or very sharp and very focused, even so they will have a kind of gaze where their eye kind of wanders from idea to idea. And so you'll just see like a gaze of extroverted intuition might be, it's dreamy. They'll kind of look through the environment a certain way, and they will not have that sharp, incisive, focus in how they look at someone or something. So it's very interesting. So that's why INFPs can be mistaken as individuals who are, just childlike, or who are very dreamy and lost in their physical environment and who are not cognitively alert. But this is actually a misunderstanding, because their first function is introverted feeling, which is a very, very deep, very penetrative function that can even be intense in a good and pleasant way, not like intense in some kind of traumatic way or something like that, because that word has connotations. So someone who has extroverted intuition the thing that happens with extroverted cognitive functions is that, they're always visible to someone externally, no matter where they are in the stack. So if someone has an extroverted function in the first slot, their second slot, their third slot, or their fourth slot, it is always visible to someone who's looking at them or who's, interacting with them. So if someone has, extroverted feeling, people in their environment might think that they have excellent, attunement to other people's feelings, and that, they respond in a way that's very pleasant. They won't feel like, they're interested in just their own interests or something like that. Someone with extroverted intuition is perceived as someone who has very interesting ideas, very rich, intellectually, meaningful ideas. So people will want to actively engage with these individuals in conversation. Someone with extroverted sensing would, have that kind of alertness or awareness of their environment. So the introverted functions are a lot more private. You don't really get to see the introverted functions in any individual's cognitive stack unless you interact with them very deeply for the long term, when you slowly start seeing the layers of it unveil themselves. So that was a little about the second function of INFPs, which makes them very creative, thinkers and very interesting conversationalists to have deep conversation with, and you can find connections between various topics and things that other people may not see. They can also be excellent business persons and things like that as well, because of this innate creativity that they have intellectually. Now their third function in their stack is introverted sensing. This is called the tertiary function or the child function. Introverted sensing gives one excellent awareness of sensations in their own body. They're kind of naturally gifted at knowing how they're feeling and things like that. So it means that an illness, sometimes people will feel a little tired or something. Someone else might miss it, but the INFP has awareness of what's going on internally in their body. So that's why they will kind of know that I'm feeling tired and it's a good idea to rest, which can actually be a great asset, and they would thus be able to prevent themselves from overexerting and falling ill. So you kind of get a hint of how you're feeling early on. So if you're eating something and it's not something that's suitable to your body, or it's not responding to it well, the INFP would have a much higher awareness of how it's making them feel. This has not been discussed in Jungian typology in the way I'm describing. Different people have analyzed it differently, but this is what I have kind of found. Whereas, extroverted sensing, which INFPs don't have in their stack, but if someone did, for example, INTJs, which is actually a type, that can be, that are often very deep friends of INFPs, is that they will have very, high environmental awareness or sensual awareness of things that are a little more external. So, if they're with a partner, and they're engaging, in romantic sexual interaction, they will kind of have much higher awareness of how the partner is feeling physically and things like that. So it's a little different, and they're sensitive to touch and things like that. Which INFPs are not so much. Their awareness, their sensual awareness lies internally in their own body. So that's a little bit about the third function. It also gives them, a capacity for nostalgia and things like that. And they have excellent memories, and, memories that are so accurate that they could perfectly recall, the smell, the looks, and much more in their environment. Now for their last function, or their fourth function, INFPs have a function called Extroverted Thinking, or TE. This is actually a very interesting function, and unlike common perception that the fourth function is weak, many theorists have actually recognized it as one that people are actually aspiring for, because it's directly linked to your dominant function. So it's what supports it. So it's actually something that individuals are constantly trying to develop and kind of move towards. So extroverted thinking is all about efficiency, about getting things done, about using rationale and having a clear idea of how something works. It's about systems. It's about having excellent organization abilities. It's also about having authority and moving through any environment in a certain way that kind of gives you excellent results. So INFPs, the misperception is that they're not organized, or that they never complete their tasks, or they are very mild individuals. They don't have a sense of authority. But the last function is a function that for most people, some people might develop it earlier, it depends. For most people, it starts really developing in their 40s, and so you will find many INFPs in positions of leadership, CEOs, leaders, different kind of administrative head of institutions and things like that. You will find that as they grow older, they are extremely organized, they're extremely efficient, they can be excellent additions to someone's professional team because they have that internal clarity and a sense of creativity. So they're not just getting things done unlike there's a calendar and they're just ticking things off and producing things that's not meaningful. As that last function, extroverted thinking or TE, develops, they kind of are able to use their other functions, which are things that are their natural strengths, and they're able to use it for excellent leadership, for creating or accomplishing very high efficiency in whatever they try to take on. So it's very interesting. Now the last function is actually joked in certain Jungian circles that it's the one that you can use to seduce a personality type. It depends how people see it, but the way that these theorists would look at how you could use a function like this, I mean, I'm just sharing it because of sharing humor with you, is that they would say fight with an INFP, or have an argument with them, or be just a little mean to them, and you'll find that they kind of get alert about it. Just like you could seduce an INTJ by touching them, because they have extroverted sensing at the bottom of their stack. So you could kind of touch them. They will not like it, they'll be annoyed, but they will notice you. So the trick that's set for INFPs, if you want to seduce them, it's a very odd thing to mention, but either way, the way you'd go about is that you'd kind of be just slightly mean or rude, not in a disrespectful way, but in a way where they would kind of notice it and be a little surprised, right? And so then you would have their attention. So the last function is seen that way. But either way, the actual serious point I was talking about is that it's called the aspirational function. It's a very important function. It's extremely critical, and it's not as the misperception goes, someone's weakness. It's what they're aspiring to. The more you develop your lower functions, the more you're able to achieve exactly what you want. It's excellent. So that's a little overview of the cognitive stack of INFPs. FI, Introverted Feeling; NE, Extroverted Intuition; SI, Introverted Sensing; and TE, Extroverted Thinking. So I hope that helps you understand how this type kind of receives information, processes it, and responds to things in their environment. And I will share more about these functions with you in the next videos that I make. Thank you.